Game of the day today is Inversion on the PlayStation 3, and every once in a while a game will come along that has great ideas in terrible execution. And Inversion is definitely a prime example of one of those kinds of games. And when it came out, I was still subscribed to PlayStation Magazine, and it was one of those things you'd flip through the pages and you would see it, and it would look cool in images, and the idea around it sounded cool. But then it kind of came and went, so you never really heard about it again after it released. For years, Inversion actually sat in the back of my mind as one of those games I always meant to check out and just never got around to because, I knew it wasn't going to be that good, but I figured it'd probably still be a good time just for the novelty. This assumption was wrong. It is a bad time. And the interesting gimmicks can't save the game. The interesting ideas of this game just end up getting in its own way, and things that should be really cool and interesting just end up being very frustrating and tedious. There are segments where you are floating in zero gravity, and these should be really interesting dynamic combat sequences, but they just come off being very frustrating, and you do the segment over and over and over again with enemies that feel like they're doing way too much damage. And that's kind of the general vibe of this whole thing. Is it's a very rigid third-person cover-based shooter, and the age doesn't really excuse it, because this came out like a year before The Last of Us, which felt a lot more fluid, and Uncharted had been feeling fluid for a lot longer before that. So while it is an older game, it's not an old enough game where that's a valid excuse for why it feels so rough around the edges. Aiming is finicky, the way that you pop in and out of cover is rough, the way that you move feels rough. Everything about this game feels like it was designed by a team that was not competent enough to pull off its ideas. The general premise around this game is you have this anti-gravity gun, and everything around it is built off this idea of anti-gravity. You pick things up and you throw them, you can make things heavier, you can make things float. There's segments where you're moving around anti-gravity. It's got a lot of ideas for what could make for a really interesting creative game, and not just from the gunplay perspective. There's interesting ways that you could apply these ideas to puzzles. Not that the game ever attempts to do that, and not that I think it would have done it well, but what I'm saying is that the ideas are squandered on a very mediocre project. And I would absolutely love to see somebody take the ideas of Inversion and make a competent game with it, because there is a great idea buried under all of the mediocrity surrounding this. Every once in a while it scratches the surface of what could have been a fun project, but then it just never comes together. By the end, I was just so incredibly desperate for the whole thing to be over. I went in expecting like a 7, and I walked out with like a 4. It's hard to recommend Inversion, but it is today's game of the day.